treated seriously or were followed. It's quite possible that the analyst who wrote that report was not treated seriously. It was viewed as politically too hard to go after us in that way. But it is concerning that intelligence analyst felt that the US Army culture was such that it was even acceptable to produce a report like that about press criticism and how to stop it.
Julian Assange, what about your safety? Daniel Ellsberg, the most famous whistleblower in America who released the Pentagon Papers, expressed concern about your safety. Can you talk specifically about what the U.S. government has done in relation to the Australian government and in other ways in dealing with you?
Yeah. So some months, between 1 and 2 months ago, there were concerning noises coming out of the US administration that we were aware of from our sources there. And I was given warnings by Cy Hirsch and other people who are connected to that world to watch my back. Subsequently, we have discovered that the US administration, according to a well-placed Australian national security journalist and former diplomat, that an approach was made to Australian intelligence by the US for them to conduct extensive surveillance and possibly raids or detainment of our people in Australia. That was largely rejected, according to this reporter, by the Australian government for political reasons. It's quite sensitive for the Australian government to engage in cooperation that would lead to an Australian citizen, especially an Australian journalist, ending up in an overseas prison or being prosecuted in some way. Within the United Kingdom, of course, there is fairly extensive surveillance of political people who are viewed as politically sensitive in the United Kingdom. That said, we do have extensive political and media support here, and I would be extremely surprised to see any aggressive action by intelligence within the UK or by overseas intelligence operating within the United Kingdom. I think that would be unlikely to be tolerated.
Julian, do you feel you can come into the United States?
My legal advice is to not attend the United States, and I cancelled 3 media appearances in the United States, including at the Investigative Reporters and Editors Conference in Las Vegas. Now, on that same panel that I was due to speak at was Valerie Plame, the former CIA officer, but also Scott Risen, a New York Times reporter who wrote a book.
James Risen.
Revealing some... James Risen, who wrote a book revealing some details of some bungled CIA operations. He also did not speak at that panel for legal reasons relating to protecting his sources.
Congress is now rushing to pass a critical war financing bill, reportedly as early as today, fearing disclosures could stoke anti-war sentiment in this country, the WikiLeaks exposures. Your response to this?
Congress should understand that as a result of these exposures and what seems to be a general shift in feeling about the war in Afghanistan, that the population is watching intensely to what will happen. So I would ask that that war bill of $60 billion worth of funding have its proper airing. If it doesn't, we may be pushed into a position where this past 9 years will extend possibly another 9. Maybe right now is the moment to try and restructure this war in Afghanistan. It's clear that there's no easy way out of the conflict. But it is also clear that the war is escalating on all sides, that the number of kills going up, both civilian and military, is unsustainable. Something has to change, and it might as well be now, and the funding bill can be used as that moment where change has to happen.
Julian Assange, I'd like you to respond quickly to the responses of the administration, of the Obama administration. One, that this is old news, that it goes until December 2009, exactly when the Obama administration changed its policy with the surge.
Yeah, so this is a bit of rhetorical trickery by the White House. The material goes to December 31, 2009. So it's valid up to the beginning of 2010 for a 6-year period. So it does cover a sweep of the war, which hasn't yet turned around. Now, Obama's policy change came in on the 1st of December. So there is, in fact, an overlap. We can see some of what happens. But looking back through the data at successive policy changes, for example, the policy changes introduced by McChrystal, what we don't see is a real change to how things happen on the ground. So a policy change is just words, but what actually happens on the ground? Well, we can see it from this data. Very little happens. The US military and the soldiers in Afghanistan are a very, very big ship to turn around. Their interaction with that environment and with the Taliban and with the local population has its own dynamic that is independent to the policies that people try and push down from on high. We can see that as an example when McChrystal tried to introduce more metrics, more measurements of how civilian casualties were occurring. Fields pop up in the database around that time. But we see that troops that are causing civilian casualties simply don't fill out that field, or they lie about whether the casualties have occurred, or they misrepresent whether it was a civilian casualty versus an insurgent casualty. That culture and interaction between Taliban and US forces and other elements operating in Afghanistan is very difficult to change, and so we don't expect that the situation as it stands now, some 7 months after this data stopped being collected, would be that different to the previous 6 years, which we can see in the material that has been released. Julian Assange,
the charge that Wikileaks releasing these documents is a threat to national security and people on the ground in Afghanistan.
Well, this is a nonsense. First of all, whenever we hear this term, threat to national security, what are we talking about? It's time people stopped responding to that question unless it's well phrased. Do we mean the national security, the security of the entire nation of the United States? It is clearly an obvious nonsense that probably almost any kind of information could be a threat to the national security of the United States. Now, do we mean threats to a few soldiers in Afghanistan? That is a more reasonable question and a serious one. Well, the material is 7 months old. It doesn't talk about particular movements of soldiers now or any ongoing sort of operation that's going to occur. So it's not of tactical significance, but it is of significance for investigators. It is of significance for understanding the broad sweep of what is happening in Afghanistan. Remember, it is this data that the US military uses internally to monitor the situation, that it uses to develop those aggregate figures about civilian casualties, Taliban, the ratio between killed and wounded, the ratio between killed and detained over time. Now, all that original reporting, unmassaged by the Pentagon press office, is available to academics, historians, and the general public to understand that war.
Julian Assange, the founder of Wikileaks, I spoke to him yesterday in London. The war funding bill passed by the House last night. We'll be back with Assange in a minute.